The slave markets of Karos Prime smelled like fear and old blood. Thousands of beings from dozens of worlds stood in chains under the hot white sun. Buyers walked between them, checking teeth, feeling muscles, looking for weakness. Taiho stood in the human section. His wrists were raw from the metal cuffs. His body was thin and covered in old scars. He kept his head down like a good slave, but his eyes watched everything. 17 years. That was how long he had been a slave in this part of the galaxy. 17 years since the colony ship. Maganwa had fallen through a broken fold space gate and crashed into Kethrani territory. He was the only survivor they had found. Sometimes he wondered if that made him lucky or cursed. The Kethrani were tall creatures, nearly 3 meters high. Their skin was gray and tough like stone. They had 4 arms and faces that showed no emotion. They ruled this sector of space with an iron grip. Humans were rare here, exotic, valuable. Taiho had learned to be valuable in the right ways. He worked hard. He never complained. He healed fast. He'd pretended to be stupid and scared and broken. He was none of those things. Before the colony ship, before he decided to become a teacher and live a peaceful life, Taiho had been something else. He had served in the Republic's Special Warfare Command for 12 years. He had done things he tried to forget. When the Magungu left Earth, he thought he was leaving that life behind forever. The universe had other plans. A Kethrani noble stopped in front of him. This one wore expensive robes of dark purple. Gold chains hung from his neck. His 4 hands were soft, never used for work. Taiho recognized the type immediately. A collector. Someone who bought slaves for show, not for labor. This one, the noble said. His voice was like rocks grinding together. Human. How long in service? The slave dealer checked his tablet. 17 cycles, honored Vrel. Very experienced. Very obedient. Never tries to escape. Never causes trouble. Vrel leaned close to Taiho. His breath smelled like rotting meat. Look at me, human. Taiho raised his eyes. He made them empty and dull. He had practiced this look in countless mirrors. The look of a man with no fight left. Good, Vrel said. I like them broken. The wild ones are too much trouble. He turned to the dealer. I will take him. Have him cleaned and sent to my ship. Money changed hands. Taiho was sold once again. The ship that took him to his new home was cold and dark. Taiho sat in a cage with 3 other slaves. 2 were Vorini, small furry creatures used for household work. 1 was a Draxi, a tall blue female who had been crying since they left the market. Taiho said nothing to them. He had learned long ago not to make friends. Friends died. Friends were taken away. Friends made you weak, but he listened. He always listened. The guards talked freely around the slaves. They thought slaves were too stupid or too scared to pay attention. They said things they should not say. Taiho learned that his new master was Overseer Vrel, a noble of the 7th house. He managed a mining operation on a frozen moon called Jareth IV. He was known for his cruelty and his collection of rare species. He also learned that Jareth IV was a death sentence. Slaves sent there rarely lived more than 3 years. The cold killed them. The work killed them. The guards killed them for sport. The Draxi female heard this and cried harder. The Varini held each other and shook. Taiho closed his eyes and began to plan. The journey took 6 days. When they finally landed on Jareth IV, Taiho understood why it was called a death sentence. The moon was a frozen hell. The sky was gray and brown with poison clouds. The ground was black ice that went down forever. The mining facility sat on the surface like an ugly metal scar, surrounded by guard towers and walls. They were taken inside, stripped, examined, and given numbers. Taiho became slave 7 to 742. The 7 meant he was assigned to pit 7. The 742 meant he was the 742nd slave to work. There, he wondered how many of those 741 were still alive. Not many. He guessed. The pit boss was a Kethrani named Vor. He was missing one of his 4 arms, replaced with a metal claw. He looked at Taiho with disgust. "Human," he said, "you will not last long. Your kind is soft, weak. You break easy." "Yes, master," Taiho said. He kept his voice flat and empty. Vor smiled. "It was an ugly thing. Good. You know your place. Maybe you will last a little longer than the others." They put him in a work team and sent him down into the pit. The pit was a hole in the ice, 3 kilometers deep. The walls glowed with valuable minerals that the Kethrani used to power their ships. Slaves dug these minerals out with hand tools, loaded them into carts, and pushed them to the surface. It was back-breaking work. The cold cut through the thin slave clothes like knives. The air was thin and hard to breathe. Guards watched from platforms above, ready to punish anyone who slowed down. Taiho worked without complaint. He watched. He learned. He saw which guards were cruel and which were lazy. He memorized the patrol schedules. He studied the layout of the tunnels and shafts. He noted where the weapons were stored, where the control rooms were located, where the weak points might be. And he saw the other slaves. Most were broken, truly broken, not pretending like him. They moved like machines, eyes empty, souls dead. But some still had fire in them. Some still looked up instead of down. He saw a human woman helping an injured worker stand. She had kind eyes and gentle hands. He saw a teenage human boy who still smiled sometimes, who still believed rescue might come. He saw an old human man who walked with dignity, even in chains, who refused to bow even when the guards hit him. And he saw the children, 7 Kethrani cubs, small and thin, working alongside the adults. They were young, so young. The oldest looked maybe 12 in human years. The youngest could not be more than 4. Kethrani children in a Kethrani slave pit. That was strange. That was wrong. Taiho filed that information away for later. That night, in the crowded slave quarters, he lay on his thin mat and stared at the ceiling. Around him, hundreds of slaves slept the deep sleep of exhaustion. Taiho did not sleep. He was thinking. He had survived 17 years by being invisible, by being patient, by waiting. But something about this place felt different. Something about those children, those cubs, made him feel things he had buried long ago. He was old now, or at least he felt old. His body was tired. His heart was tired. He had stopped hoping years ago, but maybe, he thought, maybe it was time to stop surviving and start living. Maybe it was time to fight. He closed his eyes and began to plan. Weeks passed on Jareth 4. Taiho learned the rhythm of the pit. Wake before dawn. Eat thin soup that tasted like metal. March down into the frozen darkness. Dig until your arms stopped working. March back up. Sleep. Repeat. It was a rhythm designed to kill hope. Most slaves lost themselves within the first month. They became empty shells, moving through the days without thought or feeling. Taiho used the rhythm differently. He used it to hide. While his body worked, his mind mapped every tunnel, counted every guard, noted every weakness in the system. And slowly, carefully, he began to make friends. The human woman was named Yuna. She had been a nurse on a medical transport ship before she was captured 5 years ago. She was 32 years old, thin from hunger, but her spirit was not broken. Every night, she moved through the slave quarters, checking on the sick, comforting the dying, sharing her small food ration with those who needed it more. She was the heart of Pit 7. Everyone loved her. "You watch too much," she told Taiho one night. They were sitting in a corner of the sleeping area, speaking in low voices. "The guards will notice. I am careful," Taiho said. "Careful gets you killed slower. That is all." She looked at him with tired eyes. "I have seen your type before. You think you can fight back. You think you can change things. But this place breaks everyone eventually." "Maybe," Taiho said. "Or maybe not everyone." The teenage boy was named Dowan. He was 16, tall for his age, with a smile that refused to die. He had been born on a colony that the Kethrani destroyed when he was 10. His parents had been killed in front of him. He had been a slave for 6 years, but he still believed. Every night, he would look at the stars through the small windows and whisper, "They will come. Earth will find us. They will come." Taiho did not have the heart to tell him the truth. Earth did not even know this part of the galaxy existed. No one was coming, but that hope, that foolish, beautiful hope, was worth protecting. The old man was named Hajin. He was 63, ancient by slave standards. Most did not live past 40 in the pits. He had survived for 15 years through pure stubbornness and clever thinking. "I was an engineer before," he told Taiho one day while they worked side by side. "I built ships. Beautiful ships. Fast ships. Now I dig in the ice like an animal." "Do you remember how they work?" Taiho asked. "The ships?" Hajin gave him a sharp look. "I remember everything. Why do you ask?" Taiho just smiled and went back to digging. But it was the children who changed everything. The 7 Kethrani. Cubs were unlike any slaves Taiho had ever seen. They were not captured from other worlds. They were born Kethrani, the same species as their masters. Yet they wore chains like everyone else. Taiho asked Yuna about them one night. "Political prisoners," she said softly. "Their parents were rebels. They spoke against the Empire. They tried to make changes. The Empire killed them for it. And the children? Punished for the sins of their parents. The Empire wants everyone to see what happens to traitors. Even their blood is cursed." Yuna's voice was bitter. "They are treated worse than any of us. Their own kind hates them most of all." Taiho watched the cubs work the next day. The guards hit them more often. The other Kethrani slaves refused to speak to them. They ate last, slept in the coldest corner, received the hardest jobs. The oldest cub was a male named Torik. He was 12 and tried to protect the others. He took beatings meant for the smaller ones. He gave his food to those who were hungrier. The youngest was a female named Riss. She was 4 years old, tiny, with big dark eyes that saw everything. She never spoke. She moved like a shadow, small and silent and invisible. One night, Taiho found her crying alone in a corner. He sat down next to her, not too close, not threatening. He said nothing. He just sat. After a long time, Riss spoke. Her voice was small and rough from crying. "Why do they hate us?" It was a question with no good answer. Taiho thought for a moment. "Because they are afraid," he said finally. "Afraid of what?" "We are small. We cannot hurt them. They are afraid of what you represent. Your parents were brave. They stood up and said the truth. That scared the powerful people. And when powerful people are scared, they become cruel." Riss looked at him with her big dark eyes. "My mother said the same thing. Before they killed her." Taiho felt something crack inside his chest. Something he had kept frozen for 17 years. "Your mother was wise," he said. "She told me to be strong. She told me to survive. She told me one day things would change." Riss wiped her eyes. "But I do not think things will change. I think we will die here." Taiho was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and put his hand gently on her small shoulder. Listen to me, he said. I am going to tell you something, and I want you to remember it. Can you do that? Rhys nodded. Things can always change, always. No matter how dark it gets, no matter how hopeless it seems, change is always possible. But it does not happen by itself. Someone has to make it happen. Someone has to be brave enough to start. How do you know? Tai-Ho smiled, and for the first time in many years, it was a real smile. Because I have seen it. I have seen one person change everything. I have seen the impossible become possible. And I'm going to show you. Rhys looked at him for a long time. Then, slowly, she nodded again. From that night on, something shifted in Pit 7. Tai-Ho began to teach. Not openly, not obviously, but in small ways. He showed the cubs how to move without being seen. He taught them hand signals so they could communicate without words. He trained their eyes to watch for patterns. Yuna noticed what he was doing. At first, she was angry. You will get them killed, she hissed at him. You will get us all killed. Maybe, Tai-Ho said. Or maybe I will set them free. No one escapes from Jareth 4. No one has ever escaped. Then we will be the first. She stared at him for a long moment. Then something in her eyes changed. The nurse, the caretaker, the gentle soul who had spent 5 years just trying to keep people alive, looked at him and made a decision. Tell me what you need, she said. Dao and joined next. Then Hajin. Then, one by one, other slaves who still had fire in their hearts. The cubs became their secret weapon. They were small enough to crawl through vents. They were invisible to guards who did not think children were worth watching. They could go places adults could not go. Rhys was the best of them all. She moved like smoke, silent and unseen. She memorized guard schedules faster than Tai-Ho could. She found paths through the facility that no one else knew existed. She stopped crying at night. She stopped looking hopeless. Instead, when she looked at Tai-Ho now, there was something new in her big dark eyes. That it was hope, that it was fire, that it was the beginning of a rebellion. Overseer Vrel came to inspect Pit 7 on the coldest day of the cycle. His transport ship landed on the frozen surface like a black metal bird. Guards ran to form lines. Officers shouted orders. Every slave was pulled from the pit and forced to stand in rows under the gray poisonous sky. Tai-Ho stood with the others, head down, eyes watching. His heart beat steady and calm. He had learned long ago to control his fear. Vrel stepped off his ship, wrapped in expensive furs. His 4 hands were covered in golden rings. He looked at the slaves the way a farmer looks at animals, calculating their value, judging their worth. Production is down, he said. His voice echoed across the frozen ground. 12% below target. This is not acceptable. The pit boss Vor bowed low. Honored Overseer, the deep veins are harder to reach. We have lost many slaves to the cold and the gas leaks. We need more workers to meet the quota. Vrel waved one of his 4 hands dismissively. Excuses. I do not pay you for excuses. I pay you for results. He walked slowly between the rows of slaves, looking at each one. Perhaps the problem is not the ice. Perhaps the problem is motivation. He stopped in front of the human section. His cold eyes moved from face to face until they found Tai-Ho. You, Vrel said. I remember you. The exotic. The one who is always so obedient. Tai-Ho kept his eyes down. Yes, master. The pit boss tells me you have become popular. The other slaves look to you. They follow your example. Vrel's voice was soft, dangerous. I do not like slaves who are popular. Popular slaves give others ideas. Ideas are dangerous. Tai-Ho said nothing. Bring him to the platform, Vrel commanded. The guards grabbed Tai-Ho by the arms and dragged him to the center of the yard. A metal platform stood there, stained dark with old blood. A post rose from its center, worn smooth by countless hands that had gripped it in pain. They chained his wrists to the post. They tore the thin shirt from his back. The cold air cut into his skin like knives. "Bring the children to the front," Rel ordered. Taiho's heart stopped for one beat. Then he understood. The guards pulled the 7 Kathrani cubs to the front of the crowd. Tarek tried to shield the smaller ones, but the guards shoved him aside. They forced all 7 to kneel in the frozen dirt. Facing the platform, facing Taiho. Riss was directly in front of him. Her big dark eyes were wide with fear. Vrel walked to stand beside her. He put one of his 4 hands on her small head, a gesture that might have looked gentle if his eyes were not so cruel. "Watch carefully, little traitor," he said. "This is what happens to slaves who inspire hope. This is what happens to those who make others believe things can change." He nodded to the executioner. The electromagnetic lash hummed to life. It was a terrible weapon, designed to cause maximum pain without killing. The energy would tear through flesh and nerves, leaving wounds that burned like fire for hours. The first strike hit Taiho's back. Pain exploded through his body. Every nerve screamed. His fingers gripped the post so hard his knuckles turned white. But he made no sound. He looked at Riss. He found her eyes. And he smiled. The second strike came. The third. The fourth. Each one tore flesh from bone. Each one sent waves of agony through every part of him. The crowd watched in silence, terrified. Beaten. Taiho kept smiling at Riss. At the 10th strike, something changed in her eyes. The fear did not disappear, but something else appeared beside it. Something stronger. At the 11th strike, her small voice broke the silence. 11. Rel looked down at her, confused. "What did you say?" 12, Riss said, louder now. Her voice was shaking but clear. The executioner delivered another stroke. Taiho's body jerked against the chains. Blood ran down his back in dark rivers. 13, said Torek, the oldest cub. He was looking at Taiho now, not at the lash. 14, said another cub. 15, said a third. And then, like a wave building strength, the counting spread. Other slaves joined, their voices small at first, then growing stronger. 16, 17, 18. Yuna's voice rang out from the crowd. 19. Dawan joined her. 20. Old Hajin raised his head high. 21. The guards looked at each other, uncertain. This had never happened before. Slaves did not count. Slaves did not speak during punishments. Slaves did not do anything together. But now the entire pit was counting. 20-2. 23. 300 voices speaking as one. The sound echoed off the ice walls, bounced between the guard towers, filled the gray sky with something that had been absent from Jareth 4 for a very long time. Unity.vrell single quotes, S face twisted with anger and something else. Something he had never felt before in front of slaves. Fear. Stop, he commanded the executioner. Enough. The lash fell silent. Taiho hung from the post, his back a ruin of torn flesh, but still alive. Still smiling. Vrel walked to him and grabbed his face with 2 of his hands, forcing Taiho to look at him. What did you do? Vrel hissed. What did you teach them? Taiho's voice was weak but clear. I taught them to count. Vrel threw him aside in disgust. He turned to his guards. Take him to medical. Keep him alive. I want to question him later. He looked at the counting slaves with hateful eyes. Put them all back to work. Double shifts. No food until productivity improves. He stormed back to his ship without looking back. The guards unchained Taiho and dragged him toward the medical bay. As they passed the cubs, he managed to turn his head and meet Riss's eyes one more time. She was crying again, but not from fear. She was crying because she understood Dot in the medical bay. Yuna was waiting. She had bribed a guard to let her in. Her hands worked quickly, cleaning wounds, applying medicine, stopping the worst of the bleeding. "You are a fool," she whispered as she worked. "You almost died out there." "But I did not," Taiho said. His voice was barely a whisper. "Why did you smile? You were being torn apart, and you smiled at a child." "Why?" Taiho closed his eyes. The pain was everywhere, burning through him in waves. But underneath the pain, there was something else. Something warm. Because she needed to see that they cannot break us. She needed to know that no matter what they do, they cannot take away our choice to be brave. They can hurt our bodies, but they cannot touch our souls. Not unless we let them. Yuna was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "The whole pit is talking about what happened. Everyone. Even the slaves who had given up. They are talking about the human who smiled and the little cub who counted." "Good," Taiho said. "The guards are scared. I can see it in their eyes. They do not understand what happened today." "Good." Yuna finished treating his wounds and sat back. She looked at him with new eyes, seeing him clearly for the first time. "You are not just a teacher, are you?" "You never were." Taiho opened his eyes and met her gaze. "No, I was something else before. Something I tried to forget. But some things cannot be forgotten. Some skills cannot be unlearned." "What were you?" "I was a soldier. A very good one." He tried to sit up and winced in pain. "And now I am going to be a soldier again. But this time, I'm going to fight for something worth fighting for." "The escape plan?" "The escape plan." Taiho smiled again, though it cost him dearly. "They just told me they are ready. All of them. Every slave who counted tonight made a choice. They chose to stand together. They chose hope over fear." Yuna took his hand and squeezed it gently. "Then let us make sure their choice means something." "It will," Taiho said. "I promise you. It will." Outside the medical bay, in the frozen darkness of Pit 7, 300 slaves returned to work with something new in their hearts. And in the coldest corner of the sleeping quarters, 7 Kethrani cubs huddled together, whispering to each other about the human who smiled. And the lesson he had taught them: you can count your wounds, or you can count your blessings. The choice is yours. The months after the lashing were the most dangerous of Taiho's life. Vrel had returned to his comfortable estates on the homeworld, but he left orders behind. Watch the human. Report everything he does. Find out who his friends are. Taiho felt the eyes on him constantly. Guards followed him through the tunnels. Officers questioned the slaves who talked to him. The pit boss Vor took personal pleasure in assigning him the hardest and most dangerous jobs. But Taiho had survived 17 years as a slave. He knew how to be patient. He knew how to wait, and he knew how to use the attention on him to hide what was really happening. While the guards watched Taiho, the cubs moved freely. Riss became his shadow, his secret eyes and ears. She was 4 years old, tiny and silent, and the guards barely noticed she existed. Every night, she crawled through ventilation shafts that adults could never fit through. She memorized patrol schedules. She found hidden passages and forgotten storage rooms. She mapped the entire facility in her small, clever head. Tarek, the oldest cub, organized the other children. They developed a system of hand signals based on what Taiho taught them. They could communicate across rooms without making a sound. They'd pass messages between work teams without anyone noticing. The other cubs each had their own jobs. One watched the armory. One tracked food supplies. One counted guards and noted which ones were lazy or tired or drunk. They were small. They were invisible. They were everywhere, and they were angry. The anger was important. Taiho had seen many slave uprisings fail because the slaves had lost the ability to feel. Years of pain and hopelessness had turned them into empty shells who could not imagine a different life. But the cubs still felt everything. They remembered their parents. They remembered freedom. They remembered what it meant to be treated like people instead of property. That memory was fuel. That memory was fire. While the cubs gathered information, the adults prepared. Yuna ran her medical rounds like always, but now she carried more than bandages. She collected chemicals from the supply rooms, small amounts that would not be missed. She stored them in hidden places throughout the pit. Hajin, the old engineer, taught classes in secret. He showed trusted slaves how the mining machines worked, which parts were weak, which components could be removed and used as weapons. He also studied the communication systems in the power grid, looking for ways to blind the guards when the time came. Dowan recruited fighters. He was young and still believed in heroes, which made him perfect for the job. He found the slaves who still had strength in their bodies and fire in their hearts. He trained with them in dark corners, teaching them to fight with mining tools and bare hands. Taiho coordinated everything. He received reports from Riss each night, processed the information, and adjusted the plan. He met with his lieutenants in brief whispered conversations during work shifts. He solved problems and made decisions that could mean life or death. It was the most important work he had ever done. The plan came together slowly, piece by piece, over 5 long months. The first step was the communications array. Hajin had identified the main relay that connected Jareth 4 to the Kathrani military network. If they could disable it, the guards would not be able to call for help. The second step was the armory. There were 3 weapons lockers in the facility, each protected by electronic locks and guard patrols. Riss had found a way into the smallest one through a ventilation shaft that no adult could fit through. The third step was the power grid. The facility ran on a central reactor. If they could overload certain systems, they could create confusion and darkness that would cover their movements. The fourth step was the ships. 3 transport vessels sat in the landing bay at all times. Hajin believed he could get them running, but they would need time, at least 20 minutes without interference. The 5th step was getting everyone out. 347 slaves spread across multiple levels of the facility. Moving them all to the landing bay without being detected would be almost impossible. The night they chose was the coldest of the year. A storm was coming, the kind that grounded all ships and kept everyone inside. The guards would be lazy and distracted. The conditions were perfect. Taiho gathered his core team in the deepest part of the mine, far from any guards. "Everyone knows their jobs," he said. His back still ached from the lashing, but his voice was strong. "We have one chance at this. If we fail, they will kill us all. But if we succeed, we will be free. Not just us. Everyone who comes after us. Every slave who hears our story and realizes that escape is possible." He looked at each of them in turn. Yuna, who had spent 5 years keeping broken people alive and was now ready to help them fight. Hajin, the old man who had built starships and now built rebellion. Dowan, the boy who still believed in heroes and was about to become one. And Riss, small, silent Riss, who had started this all by counting out loud when everyone else was too afraid to speak. "We move at midnight," Taiho said. "May we all see the stars as free people." They moved. Riss went first, crawling through the ventilation shafts toward the smallest armory. She carried a bag made from torn clothes, empty now, but soon to be filled with weapons. She moved in perfect silence, a ghost in the darkness. The lock on the armory was electronic, but Hajin had taught her what to do. She pulled a small device from her pocket, attached it to the panel, and counted to 30. The light changed from red to green. The doors slid open. Inside were 12 energy pistols and 4 rifles. She could not carry them all, but she took what she could. The bag grew heavy on her small shoulders, but she did not slow down. While Risk gathered weapons, Yuna moved through the slave quarters. She woke people with gentle touches and whispered words. She had spent 5 years earning their trust. Now she used it. The time has come. Move quietly. Follow the green lights. Green lights that Dowan was activating along the secret paths they had discovered, marking the route to the landing bay. At exactly the same moment, Hajin reached the communications array. He was old and slow, but he knew machines like he knew his own hands. He opened the main panel, found the critical connections, and cut them one by one. The facility went silent. No signals in or out. They were alone. In the guard station, alarms should have sounded. But Taiho was already there. He had allowed himself to be captured on purpose. 2 guards had found him wandering where he should not be. They had dragged him to the station to report the violation. They never got the chance. Taiho's hands had been weapons long before he ever held a gun. The first guard died before he knew he was in danger. The second managed to reach for his weapon, but Taiho was faster. Always faster. He took their keys, their weapons, and their communication devices. Then he sent the signal. 3 taps on the metal wall. The sound echoed through the pipes and tunnels, reaching every corner of the facility. What happened next was chaos and violence and desperate hope all mixed together. Slaves rose up in every section of the pit. Some had weapons from Riss's raid. Others used mining tools. Others used only their hands and their fury. Guards fell. Some surrendered when they saw how many slaves were fighting. Others fought and died. A few tried to run and were cut down by people they had beaten and tortured for years. Down and led a group to the main armory and broke it open with stolen explosives. Now, everyone had weapons. Hajin ran to the landing bay and began preparing the ships. His old hands moved with the speed and certainty of long practice. One ship hummed to life. Then another. Yuna guided groups of slaves through the chaos, keeping them calm, keeping them moving. She had saved their lives with medicine. Now she saved their lives with leadership. And Taiho went to find Overseer Vrel's personal representative, the pit boss Vor. He found him in the control room, trying desperately to restore communications. Those 4 hands flew across the controls, but nothing worked. Hajin had been very thorough. Vor heard footsteps and turned. When he saw Taiho standing in the doorway, his face went pale. "You," Vor said. "This is impossible. Slaves do not revolt. Slaves do not organize. Slaves are broken. You are broken." Taiho walked slowly toward him. In his hand was a mining pick, the same tool he had used to dig in the ice for months. "You made a mistake," Taiho said. "You lashed me in front of the children. You thought you were teaching them fear. Instead, you taught them something else." "What?" Vor backed against the wall, all 4 hands raised in useless defense. "You taught them that even when you hurt us, we do not break. You taught them that hope survives everything. You taught them that if one person is brave enough, everyone else will find their courage too." Taiho raised the mining pick. The smallest one counted out loud. "Now, there are 300 counting with her. That is what you gave us, Vor. That is your legacy." The pick fell. 20 minutes later, 3 ships rose from the landing bay of Jareth IV and disappeared into the storm. Behind them, the facility burned. The asteroid belt of the Karos system became their first home. 347 freed slaves, cramped into 3 stolen ships, with barely enough food and water to survive. They found a large asteroid with caves deep enough to hide in and ice deposits they could melt for water. It was cold and dark and difficult, but it was theirs. Tahoe organized the survivors into work teams. Everyone had a job. Everyone contributed. The strong helped the weak. The skilled taught the unskilled. They built living quarters in the caves, set up water collectors, rationed their stolen food supplies carefully. It was hard. It was often desperate. But they were free. The 7 cubs stayed with Tahoe. They had no family left, no world to return to. He became their guardian, their teacher, their protector. Yuna helped him care for them, and soon others joined. An entire community formed around these children who had lost everything but refused to give up. Riss was the smallest and the quietest, but she was never far from Taiho's side. She watched everything he did and learned everything he taught. She had been invisible her whole life. Now she was learning to use that invisibility as a weapon. One night, she came to him with a question. They were sitting on a ledge overlooking the main cave, watching the other survivors work and talk and laugh below. The sound of laughter was still new and strange. Some of them had not laughed in years. "Teacher," Riss said. She had started calling him that instead of his name. "Why did you smile? When they were hurting you, why did you smile at me?" Taiho looked at the stars visible through the cave opening. They were different stars than Earth's, but they were beautiful, all the same. "I was counting," he said. "Counting what? The lashes?" "No," he smiled at the memory. "I was counting blessings." Riss tilted her head, confused. "I do not understand." "You were in pain. There was blood." "What blessings?" Taiho turned to look at her. She was so small, so young, but her eyes held a wisdom far beyond her years. She had seen too much. She had suffered too much. But she was still here, still asking questions, still wanting to understand. "I was counting all of you," he said. "Every face in that crowd. Every slave who still had hope in their heart. Every person who might be brave enough to fight if someone showed them it was possible. I was counting reasons to survive. Reasons to keep going. Reasons to believe that everything I had been through meant something." He put his hand gently on her small shoulder. "And I was counting you most of all. The smallest one. The one who surprised everyone. The one who found her voice when everyone else was silent. You were my biggest blessing that day, Riss. You reminded me why I was fighting." Riss was quiet for a long time. Then she moved closer and leaned against his side. "I want to be like you," she said. "I want to be brave. I want to help others be brave too." "You already are," Taiho said. "You already do." The months passed. Their hidden base grew stronger. Scouts found supply ships to raid. Engineers salvaged technology from wrecks floating in the asteroid belt. Hajin worked miracles with broken machines, building defenses and communication systems from nothing. And word spread. The escape from Jareth IV became a legend whispered in slave pits across 12 systems. The human who smiled. The cub who counted. The impossible uprising that succeeded. Other slaves heard the story and found new hope. Other pits began to rise. Some failed, and the losses were terrible. But some succeeded, and more freed slaves found their way to the asteroid belt. The population of their hidden base doubled, then tripled. Ships arrived carrying fighters and farmers, engineers and teachers, the young and the old, all species united by their shared experience of chains. Tahoe organized them all. He built command structures and training programs. He turned escaped slaves into soldiers and sailors. He created something new, something that had never existed before in this part of the galaxy. A resistance. A rebellion. A movement. They called themselves the Free Systems Coalition, and their symbol was a broken chain. The Kathrani Empire noticed. They sent hunters, but the hunters could not find the base. They sent spies, but the spies were caught. They sent warships, but the asteroids were too difficult to navigate. and the coalition had learned to use the terrain against their enemies. Year after year, the coalition grew stronger while the empire grew weaker. Other subject species saw what the freed slaves had done and began their own rebellions. Trade routes were disrupted. Military resources were stretched thin. The mighty Kethrani Empire, which had ruled this sector for 1,000 years, began to crack. 15 years after the escape from Jareth IV, everything changed. Admiral Park Taiho stood on the bridge of the flagship Mugunghwa II, named in honor of the colony ship that had brought him to this part of the galaxy so long ago. He was older now, gray in his hair and lines on his face, but his eyes were still sharp and his mind was still quick. Around him, officers from a dozen species worked at their stations. Humans stood beside Kethrani, who had joined the rebellion. Barini and Draxi, and others who had once been slaves, now wore coalition uniforms with pride. And beside him, as always, stood Ristot. She was not small anymore. She had grown into a tall and powerful woman, a commander in her own right, respected and feared throughout the fleet. She had led dozens of battles and won most of them. She had freed thousands of slaves with her own hands, but she still called him teacher. And she still stood at his side when the moments were important. This was an important moment. Admiral, the tactical officer reported. All ships are in position. Koros Prime is directly ahead. No defensive fleet detected. Their main forces are scattered across the sector, trying to contain our other attacks. Taiho nodded. This was the day they had been working toward for 15 years. The Kethrani homeworld. The heart of the empire. The place where everything would end or begin. He turned to Riss. How many ships do we have? She smiled, and he saw echoes of the small child who had counted last strokes in her eyes. Why don't you count them yourself? Taiho looked at the tactical display. Coalition warships filled the screen, more than he could easily count. Battleships and cruisers, fighters and bombers, transport ships carrying ground forces. Ships built in hidden shipyards, ships stolen from the enemy, ships that had defected from the Imperial fleet when their crews chose freedom over tyranny. He started counting. He stopped at 1,000. I think that's enough, he said. Riss laughed. It was a good sound, a free sound. More than enough, teacher. Much more than enough. Taiho opened a channel to all ships. His voice reached every crew, every soldier, every freed slave who had chosen to be here for this final battle. This is Admiral Park Taiho. 15 years ago, 347 of us escaped from a frozen hell called Jareth IV. We were broken and bleeding and barely alive. But we were free. He paused, remembering. That day, I learned something important. One person's courage can wake the courage in others. One voice can become 1,000. One small child, the smallest and weakest among us, can start a revolution just by counting out loud. He looked at Riss and smiled. Today, we finish what we started. Today, we break the chains forever. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone who comes after us. Every child who will be born free. Every slave who will never have to kneel. Every person who will live their life knowing that they matter, that they belong to themselves and no one else. He straightened his uniform and faced the view screen. All ships, begin your attack. For freedom. For the coalition. For everyone who counted when everyone else was silent. The fleet surged forward. 1,000 ships moved as one, carrying the fire of hope into the heart of the Empire. And on the bridge of the Mugunghwa II, Commander Riss of the Free Systems Coalition stood beside the man who had taught her to count and watched. As her people finally came home, they had counted wounds once. Now, they counted blessings. Now they counted stars. Now, they counted generations of freedom stretching endlessly into the future. All starting from one moment of courage in the frozen darkness of a slave pit. The smallest one had said count, The whole galaxy had listened.